The following story is a work of fiction.
The price should have told him everything. $43,000 for a 3-bedroom colonial on a quarter-acre lot in Harwick County. The realtor, a reedy man named Fletcher who smelled of stale coffee and avoided eye contact, kept calling it a motivated seller situation, which Daniel Calloway translated, in his blunt and practical way, to "someone died here and nobody wants it." He didn't care. At 34, after a decade of rent in overpriced shoebox apartments, Daniel wanted walls he could nail things into. He wanted a garage. He wanted silence. He got 2 out of 3. The house sat at the far end of Mercer Lane, half swallowed by overgrown hemlock trees that pressed against the siding like curious hands. The previous owners, a couple named Whitfield, Fletcher informed him with particular blandness, had moved to Nevada, suddenly, left most of the furniture behind. Daniel noted the way Fletcher said suddenly with no further elaboration, and he chose, as was his habit, not to press. He moved in on a Thursday in September. He assembled his bed frame, stocked the refrigerator, and was asleep by 10. For 4 months, the house was nothing. Quiet in the way old houses are, the occasional tick of the baseboard heaters, the moan of wind finding gaps around the attic vent. Daniel cataloged these sounds the way he cataloged everything in his life, systematically, without sentimentality, filed away and forgotten. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in January. He found it between a pizza coupon and his water bill, handwritten on cream-colored stationery in a crisp school teacher's cursive. "Mr. Calloway, I have lived on Mercer Lane for 31 years and have always considered myself a patient neighbor, but I must say that your girlfriend's behavior in the early morning hours has become intolerable. The laughing, the door banging. It was nearly 2 in the morning last Wednesday and again on Friday. I do not wish to escalate this matter, but I felt you should know. Mrs. M. Hartley, number 4. Daniel read the letter twice. He set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it while his coffee brewed. He had no girlfriend. He had not, in the 14 months since his last relationship ended, had so much as a date. He worked from home as a database architect, spoke to perhaps 4 people per week by phone, and had not had a single overnight guest since moving to Mercer Lane. He told himself Mrs. Hartley was confused. Perhaps she'd heard the television through the walls, sound carried strangely at night. Perhaps it was an animal in the crawl space. He wrote a polite response on a sticky note, walked it to number 4, and pushed it through the mail slot. "Dear Mrs. Hartley, I live alone. There is no girlfriend. I will check for animals in the walls. D. Calloway." He went back inside, poured his coffee, and sat at his desk. From somewhere above him, in the ceiling of the second-floor hallway, came a single, slow footstep. He froze. He waited 3 full minutes, not breathing, listening. The house gave him nothing. He went upstairs, checked both spare bedrooms, the bathroom, the attic pull-down. Empty, cold, undisturbed. Old house, he told himself. Timber settling. If timber settling doesn't land heel first. The weeks that followed arranged themselves into a taxonomy of unease. The sounds were not random. That was what Daniel, who thought in systems, in logic gates and cause and effect, found most difficult to dismiss. A radiator pipe expands in a continuous groan. Wood contracts in the cold with a pop or a crack, quick and reflexive. What he was hearing was neither. There were footsteps, measured, deliberate, tracking back and forth down the second-floor hallway at 2 or 3 in the morning. There was the sound of a drawer being opened slowly in the guest bedroom, a long wooden scrape, and then closed again. There was, and this was the thing he returned to most often, pressing his tongue against the back of his teeth as he tried to rationalize it, the sound of breathing. Not his own, close and feminine and utterly unhurried. Daniel stopped sleeping in the bedroom. He moved to the couch with his laptop and a lamp left on all night, and spent his waking hours constructing explanations: faulty ductwork, frequency resonance from the highway 3 miles east, auditory pareidolia brought on by stress and isolation. He built these explanations carefully, and they collapsed just as carefully, because the sounds moved with the architectural logic of a person who knew the house. On a gray Friday in February, he called a woman named Miriam Voss. He found her through a referral forum, not the kind of thing Daniel would ever have sought out in the previous version of his life, but the previous version of his life had never had a bedroom drawer that opened itself. Miriam described herself as a spiritual consultant specializing in property disturbances. Her website was spare and clinical, almost aggressively unmystical. White background, black text, no crystals, no stock photos of incense. That appealed to him. She arrived the following Monday in a gray Volvo. Miriam Voss was perhaps 60, built like a retired librarian with close-cropped silver hair and the measured effect of someone who had spent decades making frightened people feel slightly less frightened. She walked through the house without speaking for 20 minutes, touching door frames, crouching to press her palm to the baseboards, standing motionless in the center of the second-floor hallway with her eyes closed and her chin slightly raised. Daniel stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom and watched her. "Tell me about the sounds," she said, without opening her eyes. He told her without interrupting, without the sympathetic that he half expected and already dreaded. When he finished, she nodded once and asked him to open all the interior doors and windows. What followed lasted 3 hours. Miriam worked methodically, moving room to room with a bundle of dried herbs she lit from a match and allowed to smolder, trailing thin gray smoke along the corners of each ceiling. She was not performing. That was the thing that unsettled Daniel most. She approached the ritual with the brisk competence of a building inspector, pausing only to consult a small worn notebook she kept in her coat pocket. She burned something in a ceramic dish on the kitchen floor, something that smelled of pine resin and something else Daniel couldn't name, something coppery and organic. She painted a symbol above each doorframe in what looked like ash mixed with oil, 3 horizontal strokes bisected by a vertical one, and then touched each symbol with 2 fingers before moving on. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. In the upstairs hallway, the hallway where the footsteps had been, Miriam stopped. She had been walking steadily until that moment. Now she stood between the guest bedroom door and the linen closet, and she became very still in a way that was different from her meditative stillness earlier. This was the stillness of an animal that had heard something in the brush. "Mrs. Voss?" Daniel said from the top of the stairs. She turned to look at him. Her face was professionally composed, but there was something working behind her eyes. "Do you know who lived here before the Whitfields?" she asked, without opening her eyes. "No." "Before them?" "I didn't ask." She looked back at the hallway. "You should find out," she said, and continued to the next room. She left before sunset. At the front door, she turned and told him the energy had been redirected and that he should leave the ash markings on the door frames for at least 30 days. She would be in touch. That night, the house was silent. The next night, too, and the one after. On the 4th day, he received a text from Miriam's number. "Monitoring remotely. Energy stable. Contact if anything changes." He felt for the first time in weeks the particular relief of a man who had solved a problem. He moved back to the bedroom. He slept. He tried to call Miriam 2 weeks later when the footsteps returned. The number was disconnected. Her website, which he found in his browser history, returned a 404 error. Her name, searched fresh on 4 different platforms, returned nothing. No reviews, no digital trace at all. Miriam Voss, spiritual consultant, had ceased to exist as thoroughly as smoke in an open window. The food was the first indication. Daniel was not careless about groceries. He was the kind of man who kept a running list on his phone, bought the same items every 2 weeks,
and would notice, as he noticed now, that the orange juice he'd opened on Sunday was 3/4 gone by Tuesday, that the block of sharp cheddar he'd bought on the 15th had been reduced to a rind, that the package of chicken thighs, sealed and placed on the second shelf, was gone entirely on Thursday morning with no memory of cooking them. He was not eating in sleep. He was certain of this in the way you're certain of facts about yourself that no one else can verify. He ordered 2 security cameras online. They arrived in 3 days. He mounted one in the kitchen, pointed at the refrigerator and back door, and one in the upstairs hallway. He told himself it was for peace of mind. The hallway camera showed nothing unusual for 5 nights, darkness and silence, and the occasional distant sweep of headlights through the curtained window at the end. The kitchen camera showed her at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. Daniel was asleep when it happened. He reviewed the footage the next morning with the particular gray nausea of a man who has just realized his model of reality is structurally unsound.
She came from the storage room, a low-ceilinged space at the back of the house that Daniel used for boxes and his folded camping equipment. The door opened slowly from the inside, without drama or ceremony, and then she stepped out. A woman, middle-aged, lean in the way that suggested not fitness but prolonged deprivation, wearing a dark hooded jacket and moving with practiced, deliberate quiet. She went to the refrigerator. She opened it with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this many times. She stood in the cold light of the open door and ate directly from a container of leftover pasta, using her fingers, and then tucked 2 items into the front pocket of her jacket, an apple and what appeared to be a wedge of cheese. She closed the refrigerator. She stood in the dark kitchen for a moment, perfectly still. Then she looked directly at the camera. Daniel's blood temperature dropped 4 degrees. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. Her expression was unreadable. Then she turned and walked back into the storage room and pulled the door shut behind her. He called 911 at 7:13 a.m. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. They found her in the back of the storage room, behind a false panel that had been cut into the drywall years before Daniel had ever owned the house, sleeping in a camping bag surrounded by the collected evidence of weeks of careful parasitic cohabitation. Protein bar wrappers, a water bottle, stolen food arranged neatly in a canvas bag, a paperback novel, a phone charger. Her name was Dolores Marsh, 49, with a history of trespassing and 2 prior vagrancy charges. She said nothing when the officers brought her out into the morning light. She looked at Daniel with an expression that contained no apology and no hostility, just exhaustion, deep and structural. They took her away in the back of the patrol car. Daniel stood in his kitchen and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. The relief was physical. A person, he thought, a real, breathing, explicable human person. Footsteps and stolen food and the ambient wrongness of a house that felt occupied, all of it explained, all of it reduced to the comprehensible tragedy of a homeless woman with a pocket knife and a talent for staying hidden. He called a contractor about resealing the storage wall. He slept deeply that night and dreamlessly for the first time in 2 months. 8 days later, Mrs. Hartley knocked on his door. She was a compact woman in her early 70s, wearing a raincoat she clearly wore as a default garment regardless of weather. She had the face of someone who chose her words carefully because she had lived long enough to know how much damage careless ones could do. "I wanted to ask," she said, standing on his porch with her hands folded, "if everything was all right after the police came." Daniel explained briefly. The woman in the storage room, all resolved. Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly. "I'm glad," she said, although she paused. "It was last night again. The laughing. I don't sleep well anyway, and it woke me up properly. Heels on your floorboards and that laughing." She looked at him steadily. "I know you said you live alone." The world made a small, lurching movement under Daniel's feet. "Last night," he repeated. "About 2 in the morning, same as before."
He thanked her. He closed the door. He stood in the entrance hall and felt the specific terror of a paradox that refuses to resolve. Because Dolores Marsh was in police custody for 8 days, Dolores Marsh was not in his house last night. Dolores Marsh was not making any sound at all. The phone rang 40 minutes later, an unfamiliar number with a county prefix. Mr. Calloway, this is Officer Reyes, Harwick County PD. I was one of the responding officers at your property last week. A pause, the kind of pause that precedes information someone doesn't want to deliver. I'm calling because we've been looking into Miss Marsh's history for the arraignment paperwork. We pulled your home's entry records. The lock on your back door was a smart lock, registered to the previous owners. Yes, I've been meaning to replace it. According to the access log, Officer Reyes said carefully, Dolores Marsh entered your property for the first time 22 hours before you called us. Daniel did not say anything. She accessed that lock once, early Tuesday morning, one entry. That's the only time that door was opened. That's not possible. She had weeks of food in there, wrappers, a sleeping bag. I understand it's confusing. The physical evidence definitely suggests longer occupation. We're still looking into it. Another pause. Is there a reason you thought she'd been there longer? 20 seconds of silence stretched between them. Footsteps in the hallway for 8 weeks. The breathing, the drawer, the food disappearing before Dolores Marsh ever set foot in his home. No, Daniel said. No reason. He hung up and sat down on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinets, and held the phone against his chest. He had built a clean explanation, a logical, human, solvable explanation, and Officer Reyes had just disassembled it with a single sentence. Dolores Marsh had been in his house for 1 day. The food had been disappearing for at least 3 weeks. The footsteps had been going since October. Dolores Marsh had not been the source of any of it. Whatever was walking the hallway at 2 a.m., opening drawers, breathing beside him in the dark, it had been there before Dolores. It was there still, and now it knew that he knew.
He should have left that night. Looking back, he understood this clearly, the way you understand, from a safe distance, the exact moment a mistake became irreversible. He should have packed a bag and driven to a hotel and never returned. Instead, he stayed, because he was the kind of man who required evidence, and the evidence he had was maddeningly ambiguous, and the part of his brain that ran on logic and system architecture kept insisting there was a rational explanation he hadn't yet found. He slept on the couch for 4 more nights with a lamp on. On the 5th night, the lamp wasn't enough. He woke at some hour between 2 and 3 a.m. to the full, suffocating certainty that he was not alone in the room. He knew it the way you know your own name, not through evidence, not through deduction, but through some older, pre-verbal circuit that fires when the predator is close. He tried to sit up. He could not move. The pressure was total and specific, concentrated on his sternum, as though something sat on his chest with its full weight, a weight that was not physical, but felt somehow worse than physical, more intimate than any external force. His arms were pinned to his sides, his legs were stone. He could breathe, barely, in short, shallow draws, but his diaphragm worked against the weight like a man pushing a wall. He tried to call out. His voice produced nothing. The room was dark, but not in the way of a room with a lamp and blackout curtains. Dark in the way of a room that has swallowed light. And in that dark, very close to his left ear, so close he should have felt breath, but felt none, came laughter. Not the bright human laughter Mrs. Hartley had described. This was something that wore laughter's shape, but contained no warmth or humor. It was slow and arrhythmic, climbing and then stopping, climbing again and stopping, like a recording played at the wrong speed, like something that had heard laughter once from a great distance and was now reproducing it from memory. His heart rate became something catastrophic. He wrenched his eyes sideways toward the foot of the couch where the darkness was densest. She was standing there,
A figure, woman-shaped, built of shadow, but not shadow as an absence of light, shadow as a substance, a density, edges that were too sharp to be cast by anything in the room. She was tall and absolutely still, and her hands, if they were hands, hung at her sides, and her head was tilted slightly, the way a person tilts their head when they are listening. And where her face should have been, there was nothing. Not darkness, not obscured features, not the shadows that fall over a face in a dim room. Nothing. A vacancy. A place where the concept of a face simply did not apply, as though that part of the world had been cleanly removed and the remaining space had no opinion about it. Daniel's brain, built for categorization, tried repeatedly and failed repeatedly to process what it was seeing. The gaze kept searching for features and found a void that the mind refused to hold. The gaze kept sliding off, returning, sliding off again. The laughter stopped. In the silence, Daniel understood with absolute conviction that whatever was in the room with him was not frightened of him, was not threatening him in any emotional sense, was simply present, old and patient, and entirely indifferent to whether he stayed or screamed or ran or died. He was in its house. He had always been in its house. The deed with his name on it was a piece of paper. Paper meant nothing here. The pressure released at once. Daniel fell off the couch. He hit the floor on his hands and knees and stayed there for a moment, gasping, before he stood up and walked. Walked because some remaining piece of his pride would not allow running, to the front door, took his keys from the hook, went to his car, and drove. He drove for 90 minutes before he pulled into a rest stop and sat with the engine running until the sun came up. He contacted a realtor by phone the following afternoon, still parked in the rest stop lot with a gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. He listed the house at $38,000, below what he'd paid, below the outstanding balance on the repairs he'd made, below any reasonable accounting of his investment. He didn't care about any of that. He wanted it gone. The realtor, a brisk woman who handled mostly rural estate sales, didn't question the price. Low prices were not unusual in Harwick County.
Daniel did not disclose the experiences in the house. He spent 2 hours on the phone with a property attorney confirming that legally he was required to disclose only structural defects, water damage, pest infestations, and certain other enumerated physical conditions. What he had experienced fell into none of these categories. There was no checkbox on the disclosure form for presence of a faceless entity that sits on your chest at 3 a.m. and laughs. He signed the disclosure form and mailed it back without checking any boxes. He returned to the house once in the middle of a weekday morning to collect his things. He moved quickly, without looking at the second floor, without entering the hallway. He loaded his car in 4 trips and left the door unlocked. He drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The house sold in 11 days. A young couple, the Bremers, Nathan and Kara, with a 5-year-old daughter named Lily. They sent a brief email through the realtor saying they were delighted with the property and asking if the previous owners had left any documentation about the heating system. Daniel replied that he wasn't sure and that he wished them well. He moved to an apartment in a city 3 hours north, and for the first 3 months slept with the lights on. The Bremers spent their first month settling in with the thorough happiness of people who had gotten exactly what they wanted. The rooms were large, the yard was a safe country of cut grass and interesting beetles for Lily to catalog. Nathan worked on the heating system with a sense of proprietary satisfaction. Kara repainted the kitchen a warm yellow that covered, without quite concealing, the faint ash-stained symbols above the door frames. Lily was the one who found it, as children often do. She had been moving through the house in a purposeful way of small children, running her hands along the walls, tapping the baseboards, exploring by touch what her eyes couldn't yet fully name.
She stopped in the upstairs hallway between the guest bedroom door and the linen closet and pressed her ear flat against the wall. Kara watched from the top of the stairs. "Lily, baby, what are you doing?" The girl did not look up. Her small face was concentrated, tilted, intent. "Listening," she said. "To what?" A pause. The house breathed around them. "To the lady," she said. "She's laughing."